The unchallenged queen. The galaxy feared only one name, Queen Zirek. She was the ruler of the Zirek Dominion, a brutal empire that crushed entire worlds. Her army was massive, her power unmatched, and her ability to control minds made her unstoppable. Every species that resisted was either destroyed or forced into slavery. No one had ever dared to challenge her. Until now. A single human, Commander Jack Rains, stood in the heart of the Queen's grand arena. Alone. The arena was built on a floating battle station, orbiting a dead planet. It was massive, filled with thousands of alien spectators, all eager to see another fool perish before their queen. The walls were decorated with the remains of warriors who had dared to fight her. Bones, armor, weapons, all trophies of her past victories. Jack felt their eyes on him, watching, waiting. He knew they expected him to fail. They always did. But Jack was not like the others. The challenge. The queen sat on her throne, high above the arena, her piercing golden eyes fixed on Jack. She was tall, over 8 feet, her exoskeleton armor gleaming under the red lights. Her long, sharp claws tapped against the armrest of her throne as she studied him. "You are bold, human," her voice echoed through the arena, deep and powerful. "But you are also a fool." Jack smirked. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just different." The queen laughed, a chilling sound. "You are not different. You are just next." With a wave of her clawed hand, the gates at the far end of the arena opened. Out came her champion, a massive 4-armed warrior, its dark skin covered in scars. It carried 2 energy blades, each crackling with power. The crowd roared in excitement. This was the warm-up before the queen herself stepped in. Jack took a deep breath. The fight had begun. The first fight. The champion charged at Jack, swinging both blades in a deadly arc. Jack dodged, rolling to the side just in time. The energy blades struck the ground, leaving deep cuts in the metal floor. Jack had no weapons, just his speed and brain. The alien attacked again, faster this time. Jack barely ducked, feeling the heat of the blades passing inches from his head. He had seen this before. This species was strong but slow. Jack needed to think fast. As the alien raised its blades for another strike, Jack grabbed a handful of sand from the ground and threw it in the warrior's face. The alien roared, blinded for a second. That was enough. Jack moved in, grabbing one of the alien's smaller arms and twisting it hard. A loud crack echoed through the arena. The alien screamed in pain. Jack didn't stop. He grabbed a fallen weapon, spun around, and drove it into the warrior's chest. The massive alien collapsed, dead. The crowd went silent. No one had expected him to win. Not like this. Facing the queen, Jack turned toward the throne. The queen was smiling. Not angry, not surprised. Amused. "You are clever," she said, standing up. "But cleverness will not save you." She jumped from her throne, landing in the arena with a thunderous crash. Dust and debris flew into the air. The queen stood tall, towering over Jack. "This time, human," she said, "there is no escape." Jack's heart pounded. He had expected this. He knew this moment would come. The queen's golden eyes glowed as she extended her claws. Her mind control was legendary. She could break even the strongest warriors. Jack felt it immediately. A wave of pressure inside his skull. A voice in his mind. A command. "Kneel." His body froze. His knees started to buckle. The queen's power was incredible, like an unbreakable force pressing down on him. Jack gritted his teeth. He had planned for this. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a neural disruptor. A last-minute invention from Earth's best scientists. He pressed the button. A sharp, high-pitched frequency filled the air. The queen staggered. Her grip on his mind weakened for just a second. That second was all Jack needed. He lunged forward, dodging her claws, and punched her across the face. The arena gasped. The queen took a step back. She touched her face where a small drop of dark blue blood trickled down. Silence. Then the queen laughed. It was not an angry laugh, not a laugh of mockery. It was a genuine laugh. For the first time in centuries, she said, "I am entertained." Jack exhaled, his muscles tense. He had expected rage. Instead, he got curiosity. This was just the beginning. The queen raised her claws again. "Let's see how long you can last, human." The crowd cheered, eager for the real fight. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. This was going to be one hell of a battle. The first strike. The crowd roared as Queen Xerac stepped forward, her towering frame casting a shadow over Jack. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of history. No one had ever faced the queen in single combat and lived. No one had even touched her before. Yet, here he was. Jack watched her carefully. He had studied her for months, gathered every scrap of information on her fighting style. But there was something about her that no report, no footage, no survivor's story had captured, her presence. It was overwhelming. She exuded power in a way no human leader, no warlord, no soldier ever had. This was not just some dictator or tyrant. This was a being who had ruled through sheer dominance for centuries. And now she was focused entirely on him. Jack didn't have a death wish, but he also didn't plan on losing. The queen's power. The queen lifted her hand, and the entire arena fell silent. Then, without a sound, she vanished. Jack's instincts screamed at him. He jumped to the side, rolling just as her claws sliced through the air where his head had been. The force of her attack was so strong that it carved deep gouges into the arena floor. She was fast. Too fast. Jack barely had time to recover before she attacked again. She moved like a phantom, her golden eyes burning through the dust and debris. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a predator. Jack dodged another swipe, feeling the air shred past his cheek. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He needed a plan. The strategy. Jack had prepared for 3 possible weaknesses. Her arrogance. She had never lost. That meant she had never been forced to adapt. Her mind control limitations. She could dominate weak-willed enemies, but Jack had trained his mind against it. Her need for entertainment. She didn't just want victory. She wanted a worthy fight. Jack could use all of these against her. He shifted his stance, forcing his breathing to slow. He stopped retreating. The queen tilted her head, sensing the change. "You've realized something," she said. Jack grinned. "Yeah, you like to play with your food." The queen smirked. Then she attacked again. Jack didn't dodge this time. Instead, he stepped forward, raising his arm at the last second. Her claws slashed his forearm, drawing blood. But it wasn't a killing blow. It was a calculated risk. Pain shot through him, but he ignored it. He was inside her reach now. Before she could react, he punched her in the ribs, hard. The impact echoed through the arena. For a split second, the queen staggered. It wasn't just the force of the hit, it was the shock of it happening at all. The crowd gasped. Jack saw the realization flicker in her eyes. He wasn't afraid. And that, more than anything, made her hesitate. The queen's wrath. Then she laughed. A deep, powerful sound that sent a chill through the entire arena. Jack wiped the blood from his arm. That was a bad sign. "Impressive," she said, "but you bleed. And bleeding means you will die." She moved again, this time faster than before. Jack barely had time to react. She grabbed him, her claws closing around his throat like iron. With one powerful motion, she lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the floor. Pain exploded through his body. The impact cracked the metal beneath him. Jack coughed blood, his vision going blurry for a second. The queen crouched over him, her golden eyes glowing. "You are different," she admitted, "but not enough." She raised her claws for the killing blow. Jack had one last chance. The gambit. Instead of struggling, he laughed. Not out of pain, not out of madness, but because he had won. The queen hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Jack spit blood to the side and smirked. You know, this was never about winning the fight. The queen narrowed her eyes. Then what was it about? Jack slowly raised his hand, showing her what was in it. A small blinking device. A trigger. The queen's eyes widened. You. Jack pressed the button. The explosion. A massive shockwave erupted through the arena as hidden charges detonated beneath the floor. The ground collapsed, sending both of them plummeting into the depths below. The crowd screamed, the entire station shaking from the explosion. As they fell, Jack saw the queen's face. For the first time, she wasn't amused. She wasn't mocking. She was angry. And Jack knew one thing for certain. The real fight was just beginning. The queen's wrath. The explosion tore through the arena floor, sending Jack and Queen Xerac plummeting into the dark depths below. Jack felt his stomach lurch as he free fell, debris and shattered metal raining down with him. The air rushed past his ears, and for a split second, he wondered if this was how it would end, not by the queen's claws, but by his own gambit. Then, impact. Jack slammed into a lower platform, the force knocking the air from his lungs. He rolled to absorb some of the impact, but pain still shot through his ribs. His head spun, and his vision blurred for a moment. A second later, the queen landed in a crouch, her powerful exoskeleton absorbing the fall with ease. She rose to her full height, completely unharmed, her golden eyes burning with fury. Jack barely had time to react before she moved. In an instant, she grabbed him by the throat and lifted him into the air. You dare humiliate me in my own arena? Her voice was no longer amused. It was cold, filled with something Jack hadn't heard before. True anger. Jack gasped, struggling to breathe as her claws tightened. That was the point, he rasped. Her grip tightened further, and Jack's vision dimmed at the edges. Then, he moved first. With the last of his strength, he raised his arm and drove his elbow into her forearm, just below the joint. The force made her muscles spasm for a brief second, just enough for him to slip free. Jack hit the ground hard, but he rolled away before she could grab him again. The queen watched him, her claws twitching, her breathing slow and controlled. Then she smiled. Jack knew that smile. It wasn't amusement anymore. It was the smile of a predator who had just decided to stop playing. A true fight begins. The room they had fallen into was deep below the arena, a maintenance bay filled with broken machinery and old war relics from past battles. The air was thick with smoke from the explosion above, and the only light came from sparking wires and emergency panels. Jack stood, forcing his aching body to stay upright. The queen took slow, deliberate steps toward him, her claws flexing. I will give you something no other warrior has ever received, human, she said. A true fight. She lunged, and this time, there was no holding back. Jack dodged, barely avoiding a slash aimed for his chest. The impact of her missed strike cracked the floor beneath them. She followed up immediately, spinning with a second attack, her claws slicing through the air like blades. Jack ducked and countered with a punch to her ribs. But this time, she was ready. She caught his wrist mid-strike and twisted. Jack felt his shoulder pop, pain flaring through his arm. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself not to scream. The queen leaned in, whispering, "Pain will teach you your place." Jack didn't respond with words. Instead, he let his body go limp for half a second, then twisted in the opposite direction, using her own momentum against her. She wasn't expecting it. Her grip loosened for just a moment, and Jack slammed his head forward, headbutting her square in the face. There was a sickening crack. The queen staggered backward. Jack stumbled, vision spinning. He had hit hard, probably harder than was good for him. Then he saw it. A thin trail of blue blood dripped from the corner of the queen's mouth. The entire fight, She had never looked anything but confident. Now she looked surprised. A shift in power. Jack wiped his own blood from his forehead. Guess I'm harder to kill than you thought. The queen tilted her head, studying him like a scientist observing a strange new creature. Then she laughed. Not mocking, not cruel. Excited. You are different, she admitted, rolling her shoulders. Good. I was growing bored of weaklings. Jack didn't like where this was going. He barely had time to react before the queen charged forward at full speed. Faster than before. Jack dodged left, but she had predicted it. She twisted midair, her claws raking across his side, slicing through his armor. Jack bit back a scream, stumbling. Blood soaked his shirt, warm against his ribs. The queen didn't stop. She grabbed a fallen steel beam from the wreckage, lifted it like it weighed nothing, and swung it at Jack. Jack rolled under it, the beam crashing into the wall behind him, leaving a massive dent. Too strong, too fast, too smart. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't keep up with her physically, but that wasn't how humans won wars. They won with strategy. The trap. Jack took a step back, breathing heavy. The queen stalked forward, sensing the kill. He needed one more opening. He glanced at the exposed power conduit sparking behind her, the remnants of the explosion above. High voltage, enough to stun even her. Now he just had to bait her in. Jack steadied himself, pretending to be weaker than he was. He coughed, dropping to one knee. The queen smirked. Finally, she whispered, lunging forward for the kill. Jack waited until the last possible second. Then he moved. He sidestepped, grabbing her arm, and using her own momentum to redirect her straight into the power conduit. A massive surge of electricity exploded through the air. The queen's body locked up, her muscles spasming as the energy surged through her. Jack stumbled back, breathing hard. For the first time, she wasn't moving. The queen stood frozen, her golden eyes flickering. Smoke rose from her exoskeleton. Jack wiped blood from his lip. Still think I'm weak. Silence. Then, the queen took a shaky step forward. Jack's stomach dropped. She was still standing. And she was smiling. Interesting, she whispered. Jack barely had time to react before she lunged again. The rising rebellion. The queen lunged, her body still crackling with energy from the shock, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. Jack barely had time to move before she slammed into him like a meteor. The impact sent him flying backward, smashing through a pile of wreckage. His back hit cold metal, pain exploding through his ribs. His breath came in short gasps. He was running out of time. Queen Zirak stepped forward, her sharp claws leaving deep scars in the floor. The smoke rising from her body gave her a demonic appearance, as if she had just walked out of hell itself. Jack wiped blood from his mouth, forcing himself to stand again. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Still alive. The queen's voice was calm, almost curious now. Jack rolled his shoulders, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. Not for lack of trying. She let out a low laugh. You are the first to make me bleed. The first to test my patience. And yet, she gestured around them. You are alone. Jack frowned. Even if you win this battle, human, she continued, your people will surrender. The Dominion will crush Earth as it has crushed 1,000 worlds before it. Jack's hands clenched into fists. She was wrong. He wasn't alone. A new battlefield. Suddenly, the room shook. A low rumble vibrated through the walls, followed by distant explosions. The queen's smirk faded. Jack grinned. Took them long enough. The queen's golden eyes narrowed. What have you done? Jack tapped the communication device hidden in his collar. You're not the only one who knows how to make a plan, Your Highness. Above them, in the arena, chaos had begun. The rebellion begins. While Jack had been fighting the queen, the galactic audience had watched in silence, witnessing something they had never thought possible. A human, weak, weaponless, alone, had wounded the queen. For centuries, Zirak had ruled by fear, convincing the galaxy that she was invincible. But now they had seen her bleed. And that changed everything. The queen's personal guard, once unshakably loyal, began hesitating. Her conquered soldiers, once beaten into obedience, started whispering among themselves. And then, the first shot was fired. A group of enslaved warriors in the crowd, realizing the queen was not invincible, turned on their captors. Within moments, the arena erupted into chaos. Fighters who had once been slaves now fought for their freedom. The queen's empire, built on fear, was beginning to crumble. And Jack had just started the war. Back in the depths, the queen's face darkened as she listened to the sounds of battle above. "Do you really think a few desperate rebels can defeat my dominion?" she asked. Jack shrugged. "I think when people stop fearing you, they start realizing you can be beaten." The queen's claws flexed. "Then I will remind them." She vanished, moving faster than before. Jack barely had time to react before she appeared behind him, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him into the wall. His skull cracked against metal, and stars exploded across his vision. "You think you have changed something, human," the queen snarled. "I have ruled for centuries. I have slaughtered empires greater than yours. This rebellion will die, just like you." Jack grinned through the pain. "Maybe. But I don't have to win. I just have to make sure you lose." And then, he activated the final part of his plan, the fall of the throne. The device in Jack's collar beeped twice, and above them, a massive explosion rocked the station. The queen stiffened, eyes flicking toward the ceiling. Jack coughed, his vision spinning. That was your throne room." Her claws tightened on his throat. "You lie." Jack gasped for breath. "You really think I'd come here without a backup plan?" Another explosion shook the station, and this time, the queen's grip loosened. Jack kicked her away, using the moment to break free. He staggered back, breathing hard. His entire body ached, but he forced himself to stand. "Right now," Jack said, "your command center is in flames. Your guards are betraying you. Your empire, it's falling apart." The queen's golden eyes flickered with something new, not anger. For the first time, Jack saw uncertainty. A ruler who had never known defeat was finally seeing it happen. Jack cracked his knuckles. "I'd surrender now if I were you." The queen's claws twitched. Then she laughed. Not in amusement, not in mockery, but in pure, seething rage. "If I fall, human," she whispered, stepping forward, "I will make sure I drag you with me." Jack barely had time to react before she charged, and the real fight began again. The human gambit. The battle station shook violently, metal beams groaning under the weight of explosions. The queen's throne room was gone, her command center obliterated. Her empire, once thought unstoppable, was beginning to fracture. Yet, Queen Zirak stood unshaken, her golden eyes burning with something far deadlier than rage, determination. Jack had seen this before. He had fought warlords, tyrants, and monsters across the galaxy, but none like her. She was not just fighting for her throne. She was fighting to prove that she was still the queen. Jack barely had time to react before she struck. The queen unleashed. She moved faster than ever, a blur of motion, her claws slicing through the air like blades of death. Jack ducked, feeling the rush of air as her claws tore through the metal wall behind him. She was beyond furious now. She had always fought with control, with amusement. Not anymore. She was going for the kill. Jack barely managed to dodge a second strike, but his body was slowing down. The injuries, the exhaustion, the sheer force of every impact, it was catching up to him. The queen noticed. She smirked, eyes gleaming. "You fight well, human," she said, her voice calm now. "But you are not built for war like I am." Jack wiped blood from his mouth. "Maybe not, But humans don't win by being stronger. She tilted her head, amused. Then how do you win? Jack grinned. By being smarter. The final trap. The queen lunged forward again, but this time, Jack didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped into her attack, twisting his body at the last second. Her claws sliced his side, but Jack was already moving, redirecting her momentum. She stumbled for the first time. Jack acted instantly, pulling a small device from his belt and slamming it onto her back. A sharp, high-pitched frequency erupted from the device, sending a shockwave through her body. The queen screamed, staggering forward, her exoskeleton flickering with blue energy surges. The device was a disruptor, specifically designed for her species' neural system. Jack had only one of them, and it had to work. The queen collapsed to one knee, breathing hard, her claws twitching. Jack backed away, keeping his eyes on her. That should keep you down for a while. But the queen laughed. A low, terrifying laugh that sent a chill down Jack's spine. You think, this will stop me? She whispered, her muscles tensing, her body pushing against the pain. Jack's stomach sank. The disruptor wasn't working fast enough. She was too strong. Desperate moves. Jack reached for his backup plan, a plasma charge he had hidden in his armor. If he detonated it here, at this range, he could end her once and for all. But he would die with her. Jack hesitated for a split second, and that was enough. The queen exploded into motion, breaking free of the disruptor's grip, her claws closing around his throat. Jack struggled, but her grip was like iron. You are persistent, human, she growled. But your kind always falls in the end. Jack gasped for air. Think. 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 Then, he saw it. Behind the queen, through the wreckage of the battle station, a large window had been cracked from the explosions. Beyond it, open space. Jack knew what he had to do. He looked back at the queen and grinned. Wanna see something cool? She hesitated, just for a moment. Jack reached into his belt and threw the plasma charge, not at her, but at the cracked window. The explosion shattered the glass, and in an instant, the air rushed out. The force of decompression tore through the room, pulling everything toward the vacuum of space, including the queen. Her eyes widened as she lost her footing, the sudden pressure shift dragging her backward. Jack grabbed onto a nearby railing, holding on with all his strength. The queen fought, trying to dig her claws into the floor, but the force was too strong. Her body slid backward, inch by inch, toward the open void. For the first time, she looked afraid. A fateful decision. Jack watched as the queen's body was nearly pulled out into space. She grabbed onto a broken beam, holding on by one hand, her golden eyes locking onto Jack's. There was no more arrogance in them. No more mockery. Just raw survival instinct. Jack had won. All he had to do now was let go. But something stopped him. Jack wasn't like her. He didn't win through destruction and fear. He won through strategy and mercy. With a deep breath, Jack reached out and grabbed the queen's hand. Her eyes widened in shock. You fool, she whispered. Jack gritted his teeth, pulling her back into the station, fighting against the vacuum of space. The moment she was clear, the emergency shields activated, sealing the breach. The air stabilized, and silence filled the room. The queen collapsed, breathing heavily. Jack sat beside her, just as exhausted. Didn't expect that, did you? The queen stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she let out a low laugh. You are the strangest enemy I have ever faced, human. Jack smirked. And now I'm the only one who ever spared you. The queen's golden eyes narrowed, but this time, not with anger. With something else. Something dangerous. Respect. The final move. Jack and Queen Zirak sat in silence, both catching their breath in the wreckage of the battle station. The air still crackled with static from the failing power grid, and the distant echoes of battle raged far above them. Jack could feel the weight of what had just happened. He had her. He had won. He had every reason to let her die, to end her reign and cripple her empire for good. But he didn't. He had saved her. And now, she was watching him. Golden eyes sharp, unreadable. Jack had fought warlords, mercenaries, assassins, but never had he seen an enemy like this one. A queen who had never tasted defeat. A ruler who had never been spared. And now, for the first time, she owed him her life. Jack finally broke the silence. "So," he said, voice rough. "What now?" The queen's clawed fingers flexed, as if testing her strength. Then she turned to him, and for the first time she smiled, but not in mockery. In interest. "You tell me, human," she murmured. "You had the chance to end me. Why didn't you?" Jack exhaled, leaning his head against the wall. "Because that's what you expected me to do." She raised an eyebrow. "So you refused, simply to be unpredictable." Jack grinned despite himself. "No, because if I kill you, your empire keeps fighting. They turned you into a martyr. But if you live, if the galaxy sees that you lost and still breathe, they stop fearing you." The queen's smile faded. That hit deeper than any wound. For centuries, she had ruled through dominance, power, and fear, and now, a single human had shown the galaxy that she could lose. Jack saw the realization settle over her. The weight of what had just happened was far bigger than their fight. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about her legacy. The fall of an empire. A distant explosion rumbled above them, followed by the crackle of a distorted transmission. Jack's communicator flickered to life. "Commander, we've breached the control deck. The Dominion forces are fleeing." Jack let out a slow breath. It was happening. The rebellion was winning. The queen heard it too. She sat still, too still, her claws twitching slightly. Her mind was calculating, strategizing. Jack could see it in her eyes. She was not the type to surrender. If she still had power, even a sliver, she would fight until there was nothing left. Jack knew he had one shot to end this war right now. So he did something no one had ever done before. He made the queen an offer. A dangerous proposal. Jack turned to her. "You have two choices." The queen's golden eyes narrowed, waiting. 1. You keep fighting. You try to rebuild. Maybe you win, maybe you don't. But if you do, it's at the cost of millions more lives. Jack gestured upward. "And right now, you're not winning." The queen didn't respond. Jack continued. "Or 2, you change the game." The queen tilted her head, intrigued. "Change it? How?" Jack exhaled. "You end the Dominion. Right here, right now. You surrender, not because you're beaten, but because you choose to." The queen laughed, low and sharp. "You expect me to simply step down, to abandon all I have built." Jack leaned forward. "You already lost. The difference is, you can decide what happens next. Do you go down as a tyrant who refused to change, or as a leader who was strong enough to admit when it was time to let go?" The queen's eyes flashed. "You ask me to betray everything I am." Jack shrugged. "No, I'm asking you to evolve." Silence stretched between them. The queen's breathing slowed. For the first time, Jack saw hesitation in her, and he pushed harder. "Your empire will crumble with or without you," Jack said. "But if you step down willingly, you control what happens next. You can shape the future rather than being erased by it." The queen's fingers curled into fists, claws biting into her palm. "You assume I care about my own survival." Jack shook his head. "No, I assume you care about your legacy." Something shifted in the queen's expression. Jack saw it, the briefest flicker of doubt, of possibility. And that was all he needed. The queen's choice. The distant sounds of battle were fading. The station's systems were failing. The rebellion was closing in. The Queen stood. She loomed over Jack, towering, her presence still immense, still powerful. Jack met her gaze, unwavering. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unclasped the royal insignia from her armor, the symbol of her rule, and she dropped it to the ground. Jack stared at it, then at her. "Just like that?" he asked. The Queen's lips curled. "I am not defeated, human. I am simply making a new move." Jack exhaled. "Smart." The Queen gave him a dangerous smile. "You are lucky I find you interesting." Then she turned toward the exit. Jack watched as she walked away, unhurried, powerful. Not a conqueror anymore. Not a tyrant. But something new. The end of a war. When Jack emerged from the wreckage, the rebellion forces had already secured the station. His second-in-command rushed up to him. "Sir, we've taken the command deck. The Dominion forces have." She hesitated, eyes widening. "Wait, where's the Queen?" Jack smirked, glancing toward the distant docking bay, where a single ship was departing. "She's gone." His lieutenant frowned. "Should we pursue?" Jack shook his head. "No." His gaze remained on the departing ship, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She'll be back." The fall of a tyrant. The war was over. Or at least, that's what the galaxy believed. Jack Rains stood at the bridge of the rebellion's flagship, watching the holographic display of the Queen's former empire collapsing in real time. Reports came in from across the Dominion. Planets rising up, soldiers defecting, entire fleets surrendering. The once mighty Zirak Dominion was fracturing faster than anyone had expected, all because their invincible Queen had walked away. Jack exhaled, rubbing the tension from his forehead. The rebellion had won. He had done the impossible. But something still felt off. Because Queen Zirak wasn't dead. And Jack knew this wasn't the end. The galaxy reacts. Across the stars, the fall of the Dominion sent shockwaves. Some planets celebrated, pulling down the banners of Zirak's rule, declaring independence. Others panicked, fearing chaos without her iron grip. But one thing was clear. The age of Queen Zirak was over. Or at least, that's what they all thought. Jack wasn't so sure. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Tenzin, stood beside him, arms crossed. "I don't get it," she said. She was the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Why did she just leave? Jack sighed. "Because she's not stupid." Mara scoffed. "She's a warlord." "No," Jack corrected. "She was a ruler. And rulers know when a war isn't worth fighting anymore." Mara narrowed her eyes. "You think she's planning something?" Jack smirked. "I'd bet my life on it." And that's when the message came in. A message from the Queen. The holographic screen flickered, and suddenly, there she was. Queen Zirak. Her golden eyes gleamed with something new, something different from the arrogance she had once carried. Jack leaned forward, heart pounding. He had expected her to vanish, to retreat into obscurity. But instead, she was reaching out. "This is Queen Zirak," she said, her voice as calm and commanding as ever. "To the former subjects of the Dominion, to those who once served, and those who once resisted, I have one message." Jack held his breath. The Queen paused, then did something unthinkable. She admitted defeat. "I lost," she said simply. "But I do not regret what I built, and I do not regret stepping away." Mara gaped at the screen. What the hell is she doing? Jack shook his head, changing the narrative. The Queen continued, "I will not fight to reclaim my throne. The old Dominion is gone. Let it die. Let a new order rise in its place." Jack exhaled sharply. She was surrendering. But not in shame. She was choosing to control the end of her story, and that was more dangerous than any war. Because she was still a queen. And queens didn't just disappear. A dangerous alliance. The message ended, and the room was dead silent. Then, Mara turned to Jack. So, that's it. She just gives up and walks away. Jack chuckled. No, she's just picking her next fight. Mara frowned. You think she's still a threat? Jack leaned back, thoughtful. No, I think she's an opportunity. Mara looked horrified. Oh, hell no. You're not seriously thinking. Jack grinned. We spent years fighting her empire, Mara. And now, we have something better. Mara groaned. Please don't say it. Jack smirked. We have her. The Queen's offer. Hours later, Jack stood alone in his private quarters, staring at his personal communicator. A single message blinked on the screen. From Queen Zirek. Subject: a proposal. Jack exhaled. He tapped the message open. A simple text appeared. You spared my life. Now, let's see if you are worthy of it. Jack chuckled. Of course. The Queen wasn't done. And neither was he. Epilogue. The next game begins. Somewhere in the depths of space, aboard a shadowy, undisclosed warship, Queen Zirek watched the stars drift by. She had ruled by fear. She had lost to strategy. And now she would rewrite the rules. Because she was still Queen Zirek, and the galaxy hadn't seen the last of her. A small, knowing smile curled on her lips. Let the next game begin.